Międzynarodowym wyszło, którego tematem wiodącym będzie bezpieczeństwo Polski w NATO. Natomiast bardzo proszę, żebyście Państwo nie przywiązywali się do myślenia w sposób taki bardzo ścisły o tym temacie, ponieważ mam takie wrażenie, że dyskusja pójdzie w wielu innych kierunkach. Przedstawię pokrótce gości. No i już, proszę. Moderować będzie pani dziekan, pani dr Katarzyna Bezpieczeństwa. Naszym pierwszym speakerem jest Duncan z Ambasady amerykańskiej. Jako drugi speaker głos zabierze profesor Jarosław Gryz i trzecim speakerem, last but not least, będzie dr Żurawski do Grajewski, Przemysław Żurawski do Grajewski. Zaplanowaliśmy, proszę Państwa, agendę tego spotkania w sposób taki. Moderować będzie, jak mówiłem, pani dr Bezpieczeństwa. Następnie będziemy mieli 3 wystąpienia. Zobaczymy, jak one długo będą trwały. Następnie zakładamy, że przez kwadrans, chociaż też nie będziemy się sztywno trzymać tych reguł czasowych, nasi speakerzy czy też paneliści dyskutować będą między sobą i w ostatniej części proponujemy Państwu szerszą dyskusję, czyli pytania z sali, uwagi do referatu. No i tyle. Jeżeli chodzi o język, proszę Państwa, jest to spotkanie międzynarodowe, w związku z czym języki będą dwa, tak? W związku z czym będzie to język angielski i język polski. Myślę, że tutaj za ewentualne pytania, proszę się nie krępować z pytaniami po angielsku do pana Duncana. Natomiast jeżeli ktoś będzie się jednakowoż krępował, prosimy o zadanie pytania po polsku, jeżeli pan Walker nie zrozumie, będziemy pomagać. Oddaję zatem głos pani dziekan Bezpieczeństwa.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to welcome our guests. Of course, today we will have a special opportunity to, let's say, combine 2 different dimensions. One more practical, connected with diplomacy, and second, connected with research. And I hope this would be very fruitful discussion. I think this topic, Poland and NATO, is a very wide one. So I think we can discuss about, we can talk about many different problems. I think it would be quite interesting to find answers for such questions. What is NATO today? Where it is heading? What are main goals and geographical scope of its interests? And of course, we do not have to answer the question to be or not to be. Now it is quite common to admit that there is a point for NATO, but we have to know what kind of a point. From our own Polish perspective, it is also very, very essential to find answers for questions like what are advantages and what are disadvantages maybe of our membership. What can we do more? For example, as a member state, are we a kind of top dog or underdog of the situation? I think we will have plenty of time to discuss these issues. So, first of all, I'd like to invite Mr. Walker. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
It's okay, I'm going to try to stand up as well. She said my name is Duncan Walker. I'm the political military officer at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw. I've been in Poland for a number of years and arrived in Warsaw a week before the Russian invasion of Georgia and just a few days before signing the ballistic missile defense agreement with Poland. So my tenure here has been, I think, quite eventful. I was just listening to those opening comments and they sparked a couple of thoughts to introduce my own remarks. One was this question of what is NATO, what will it become? Maybe I could start by talking about what was NATO and what was transatlantic relations, what were transatlantic relations before NATO, to understand why we are where we are right now. I don't want to take too long with that because I want to talk about the present day most of my remarks, but just a little bit of a sense of the past. When you think about transatlanticism, this relationship between North America, and particularly the United States, and Europe, it's not immediately obvious. The distances that separate us geographically are quite large. In fact, for much of its history, the United States took full advantage of that distance between Europe and the United States because it didn't view Europe as a place of common interest. It viewed Europe as a place of possibly hostile intent. And if you think about it, this really begins to change in a paradoxical way in 1824 in the United States. 1824, we established something called the Monroe Doctrine. President James Monroe established the Monroe Doctrine. The United States was still a small country. It was still expanding westward across this continent of North America. And what was really concerned about is that European powers would establish imperial states on the North American continent. And so it established a doctrine that it would see that as a hostility, as even a provocation of war, should a European power establish a colony in North America or South America, which South America had just had independence after the Napoleonic Wars. If you think this was pretty bold, because the United States expressed a very large intention without any means. The American Navy was tiny, the American Army was almost non-existent. So in this way, it starts out, transatlanticism starts out as some hostility toward Europe, but it's secured by Europe, because the power that guarantees American intentions in North America, South America, is in fact Great Britain and Prime Minister Castlereagh. Britain also, for very different reasons, completely different reasons, also did not want to see European imperial establishments in the Americas. And so what Great Britain did was said, you guys will carry all the political weight, you'll make all of the gestures, you'll say all of the dangerous things, and we will very quietly support you with the Royal Navy, which was then and remained for another 100 years the largest navy in the world. And so, at the same time we were opposing Europe, we were actually guaranteeing our insecurity through Europe. It was the birth of a special relationship with the United Kingdom, which continues to this day. Also, it's the birth, in my view, of transatlanticism. But it was just a small birth. You think the great test that came to us was really the First World War. The United States stayed out until 1917, almost 3 years into the conflict. And into that war in 1918, Woodrow Wilson comes to Paris in 1919 for the Treaty of Versailles. And one of Wilson's 14 points was to have a League of Nations. This is one of the great things, to have a collective security arrangement, tying the United States to the fortunes of Europe to prevent conflict. And the American public, the American Senate rejected it. Came back to the United States to ratify the agreement that he had so laboriously negotiated and signed, and it was rejected out of hand. So the United States wasn't quite ready to codify or make formal transatlantic security ties. It did not see this interest. If you think about it, anytime you have a security arrangement with somebody, anytime you have something like NATO, you kind of need three things to exist, right? You need to have some shared sense of values, some sort. We're all kind of standing for the same things out there in the world. You need to have some shared set of interests, and you need to have some common history. And we certainly have plenty of common history, but perhaps we did not see our interests as being shared at that time. 1939 to 1945 was to kind of be the great test case of that League of Nations system, and the world imploded, 50 million people died. It was a great catastrophe. Certainly here in Poland it was a great catastrophe, but all over the world. We come in 1945 and say, whatever we're doing in 1919 and wasn't about, the United States does need to be involved in Europe. It needs to be involved in Europe in two ways, but we don't think about this. One is to protect those western parts of Europe that maintain democratic governments against the threat of the Soviet Union. So that was the first thing, a straight out expression of interest and values with Western Europe. But there also is this feeling that Europeans tend to turn around and fight each other as well, even Europeans who are friendly to us. So we aren't only going to insert ourselves as a security buffer toward an enemy that might be to the east of Europe, we're also going to insert ourselves among Europeans. We did the same thing in Asia, by the way, Japanese, with SEATO and ASEAN. But the way we codified Europe was through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Washington Treaty, which really, starting in 1947-48, was a political expression. It didn't really have any legs. It wasn't meaningful other than as a political expression. It was quite controversial in the United States. It was a difficult political fight. People forget this because NATO has lasted so long. But really with 1950, June 25th, invasion of South Korea by the North, active hostilities between communist periphery and the West, so to speak, really NATO became a military alliance. In fact, the Unified Military Command was drawn up, and the U.S. began to put size So that's kind of the origins of where we are. Now you think if you're the opponent of NATO, the potential opponent, if you're the Soviet Union and NATO is this alliance standing in your way, then this transatlantic organization is the alliance standing in the way, then your first objective, your first strategic objective is to divide the alliance along the Atlantic Ocean. And so the Soviet Union traditionally, over decades, would pursue policies to do this. I mention this because I'm going to come back to it present day. This is a similar issue that we have today, and I'll talk about that a little bit. When I was in your age, when I was in university and I came to Europe the first time in 1984, NATO was involved in a thing called the dual-track decision. The dual-track decision was to counter Soviet SSN-20s, tactical nuclear weapons. They were train-borne or on trucks, and to counter them with Pershing II or ground-launched missiles. Explosive decision, enormous protest in Western Europe among students. 100,000 students would be out on all these Air Force bases at the time, protesting the arrival of these tactical nuclear weapons. But the whole strategic purpose, and this was initiated by Western European governments, not by the United States, was to make sure we weren't de-linked across the Atlantic. The Soviet calculation was, if we threaten Western Europe with tactical nukes that exist in Europe, in Eastern Europe, then the United States may back down from the threat to its own eastern seaboard, to its own population by strategic nuclear weapons that would tear apart the alliance. And the reason we went with the dual-track decision was to put our own tactical nuclear weapons, say we are not going to de-link. Whatever happens in Europe happens to us, that we're one alliance. I'm going to jump ahead now to the end of the kind of classic tradition, the anti-Soviet tradition of NATO, where it was erected as the organization, to 1989 and 1991. This was a great philosophical crisis point for NATO in many ways. When I was in graduate school in 1991, I went to graduate school in the clubs of the Soviet Union in the August Group. It was a wonderful time to be studying this part of the world. It was happening. It was this finding of